My name is Matt Bell. I'm a novelist and professor, and this is The Written Scene.
Hello and welcome to The Written Scene. My name is Adam Greenfield. I am the host. If you are new here, welcome. What we do is we talk to authors and other artists that also do some writing about the path and process of writing. If this is not your first time, you've been here before, thanks for coming back. Tell everyone you know, friends, enemies, frenemies, grandparents, children, whoever. We don't just like to discriminate here. Today's episode is with an author that I took a class, an MFA for All class in the spring of this year, 2025, and he was one of the teachers there for a couple of the courses. And I learned a lot, specifically that I wrote a meet cute story and had no idea. So that was kind of fun to discover. But I learned, what a meet cute is, or what other stories there are to write, and it was really just a really great class. So I read his book, one of them, and I was like, I got to talk to this guy and figure out how he does it. So, Matt, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me, Adam. I appreciate it.
So your most recent novel is Appleseed. Is that
Yes,
correct?
yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Came out in 2021, I think.
2021.
So,
Awesome.
Last couple of years. Yeah.
So, can you talk a little bit about this one? What it's about? I've read the book, the back of the book, and I'm sure everybody could, but I always like to ask the author themselves what they think of it.
No, it's great. Appleseed is a climate fiction novel, a science fiction novel set over about 1,000 years. It starts in the late 1700s with a mythological retelling of the Johnny Appleseed folktale. If Johnny Appleseed had been a faun from Greek mythology, there's a near future part that's probably like 70 years in our future. It's kind of a worst case scenario, climate scenario. And then there's a third storyline that's 700 years in the future that takes place on a kind of reglaciated North America after a geoengineering attempt to geoengineer the stratosphere has gone awry. So it's just, a really slim, tight little novel covering just 1,000 years, and then kind of a combination of sort of myth and science fiction.
Where did the environmental aspect come from? I know we'll talk about a little bit of this later, but I see you outdoors a lot online. So, I mean, do you just have a fascination with it, or is that something that you really have studied before in the past?
Yeah, I think maybe two parts. One is like kind of growing up as a, lifelong like outdoors person and environmentalist, and, which I think, begins with sort of my parents, and like we spent a lot of time, outdoors hiking and camping and kayaking and things like that growing up, which, still do a lot of hiking and trail running now. And I think similarly, like, grew up in a family of environmentalists of different kinds, and that's always mattered to me. I think in some ways, this particular book, I know I was feeling a lot of like climate change, climate crisis, anxiety. And I think it was a good avenue to like explore that and to dive in and do more research. And in some ways, one of the things I got out of the book was like kind of like when you're sick and you don't go to the doctor and you feel anxious, then you go to the doctor and they tell you what's wrong with you. And it might not be great news, but at least now you know.
Now you know. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And I feel like facing into my climate anxiety by writing this novel, I don't know if it made me less worried, but it made me I understood more what I was worried about. And I, of course, do actually believe that scientists mostly have it right and we know a lot of what we could do. And I think in that way, writing the book was really helpful, that I saw like there are solutions and there are things we could be doing. It's just whether we're going to do them or not. But yeah, I think that often can be a starting place for me, like something you're a little afraid of, something you're anxious of, something you're afraid to know can be a good place to write from or into.
Now, I know your focus is fiction, but was there a reason you fictionalized this and instead of writing something that might have been nonfiction or not academic, but scientific, I guess?
Yeah. Partly that I'm not a scientist, right?
Sure, that helps.
I
Yeah.
think, I think, that's not sort of my main mode. And, there's things fiction does that the science literature doesn't. And I think doesn't always do. And one of those things can be to give readers like an experience of something, or a way of kind of making it felt as opposed to just being factual. And I think that's really valuable. In this particular case, as I started writing, I was thinking a lot about how things like climate change, that they don't just happen in one moment. One of the reasons for the long storyline is, maybe you say climate change starts with the Industrial Revolution and is going to go thousands and thousands of years after you and I are dead. And so trying to depict something like that over a larger time scale is a different feeling than like there's weird weather today,
Sure,
and just
sure.
trying to like get to a place that just the facts doesn't always get you, or it's actually really hard to feel. I think it's hard to feel the long effect of, our choices. And I was interested in that and trying to like get into it with this longer story.
There's a little bit of you've probably heard this reference before, a little bit of Cloud Atlas in that,
Yeah.
and how it's
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
kind
Yeah.
of spread out like that. And I'm curious, how difficult is it, I guess, or even can it be to maintain that story's consistency in a vastly different time periods?
Yeah, yeah, it's challenging, of course. And the way David Mitchell did in Cloud Atlas feels like an incredibly challenging approach, with each section being kind of really its own voice and its own style and its own genre. I think it's a real feat. I think for me, there are things I think about the timelines being different. Some of it being like how much magic versus how much science is in them. There's sort of a transfer as the book goes on, I think, was part of it. I also say like a lot of this is like a problem in revision. Like the way the book is laid out now is like the order of the chapters and the structure of the book. I actually got it in that form in the last like couple months of working on the book after maybe like 3 years of writing it. In the main draft, which is like a second draft, I had wrote it kind of in silos. Like I had each storyline being its own thing, and I really edited them as like their own book. So I had like a 60,000 word timeline, a 60,000 word, and a 40,000 word, and then I blended them after I had revised them all as their own kind of unit. So in a weird way, it's kind of like a book made out of maybe a trilogy. It's a like if you were juggling three books as opposed to like the
Yeah,
normal way of
yeah.
maybe plotting that. But by the time I did it, it was really kind of a fun challenge to put them back together and look for efficiencies and look for places where you could have good handoffs. It was kind of a pleasure to do that puzzle really late in the process,
Yeah,
which, yeah, I had not done before. It was an interesting way to do it.
I think I can fall in line, I guess, and agree with the challenge of that. I was just talking with some friends of mine about, as we're doing editing in our own stories, we're writing something or cutting out a chapter or changing a chapter, and then we have to go back, and when we realize that, oh no, this changed things from way earlier in the story, that now I got to go back and clean that up.
Yeah.
But that makes it fun. There's something fun about getting everything in line, I guess.
Hmm.
I don't know what it is, but it's enjoyable.
Well, I think there's a time late in the like most of the time when you're writing a novel, I think you can only really see a little chunk of it, right? Like I would say like on a normal basis, I can remember like 30 or 40 pages of prose. Like, so if I'm, editing a short story, I can kind of remember if I change something on page 2, what it does to page 20. But when I'm drafting a novel, like I don't know, 250 pages into a novel draft right now, there's no chance I could tell you what's on page 100, right?
Sure,
Like, I mean, in
sure.
like really vague terms, I could be like, this happens, but no texture. And then at the very end of a process, I can do that thing where I change like a sentence on page 370. I go, oh, I got to go fix 13. But that's for like a very, very short period of time. Can I hold like the whole book in my head like that? And it requires like working really long hours and becoming like a weirdo.
Yeah, yeah. That's our job,
Yeah,
though,
yeah.
right? Isn't that
Yeah,
part of our job?
yeah, yeah.
How much time do you take in between drafts?
It depends. I would say like usually at least like a month.
Okay,
But it depends what I'm doing. I don't usually outline before a first draft of a novel, so I do my outlining between drafts, and that can sometimes take a long time. I think for Appleseed, I wrote like a 90,000 word first draft. Didn't even really have a beginning, middle, and end, just like figuring out the book's voice, figuring out the characters, kind of seeing the plot. And then I worked on an outline for I think like 3 months between drafts. So like that's a big gap. And then probably between finishing that draft and starting a revision of it, maybe it was a month or two. For the last couple novels, I've written a short nonfiction book between drafts. So that's been
like
my,
a palate cleanser.
yeah, just to clear the brain, I think. But my novel Scrapper, I wrote a book about the video game Baldur's Gate 2 between drafts. So I would write and it was short. It was like a 30,000 word book. So big novel, short nonfiction book going back and forth. And then Appleseed, I wrote my craft book, Refused to Be Done, between drafts. So I was writing a book on novel revision between drafts of revising
revising
my
novels.
novel, which
Yeah.
was turned out to be like actually pretty helpful.
Yeah, no, that's I don't know if I've ever heard of a process where the outline comes after the first draft.
Yeah.
Did you figure that out on your own? Did someone how'd you learn to do that or figure that out?
I think I pretty much figured it out on my own, although now I know there's lots of other people who do it. I have never been a big outliner before I start. I can start with very, very little. Appleseed is, I don't know, a 500-page novel, and I started with like an image, right? I sort of had, a scenario, and like the first image which now appears like 60 pages into the book. And so I started with almost nothing. I didn't know it was 1,000 pages long. I didn't know who the characters were. I knew very, very little. And that seems to work for me. Like I think of the first draft as like a discovery draft or an exploratory draft. I'm discovering the book by writing it. My first novel, In the House Upon the Dirt Between the Lake and the Woods, I wrote like a complete draft. And then I was like, what now? What do I do with this thing? And so I wrote
Yeah.
this outline almost as like I outlined the book I had written, kind of as a like, what's in here thing. And then I revised that outline into a plan for like a second draft. And then I started over
I
and wrote the
see.
second draft. And so now I write more of like a partial draft, and then I do that planning, which in theory, I think it's supposed to make me more efficient, although it never does.
Never
Everything
does.
takes exactly the same amount of time, no matter what you do. But it's theoretically a shortcut. But that middle outline has been really, really good for me. And then, of course, you deviate from it
Of
immediately again
course,
in the
yeah.
second draft. It doesn't really, but it's a good taking stock and planning phase for me.
That is, I never, man. I have been writing for decades, and I now see the benefit of doing something like that. It's
Yeah.
it's because you actually you can see your story as a whole,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
just in the points, all the little minor details, whatever. But you see plot points and turns and changes, and you can
Yeah.
see it all at like that.
And yeah, and you really see the parts where like nothing is happening for a long time, or the like, there's 40 pages of prose here, but it's all interiority or backstory or something, and like
Yeah,
nothing is occurring here. I also think it makes me braver in revision. Like, when you have to move like a piece of the story like 60 pages to another part, it's so hard, and you
right.
have to rewrite everything, and it's just like, so you get kind of like, well, what if I didn't move it? But when it's bullet points or it's little paragraphs, it's really easy to be like, let's try something out, let's try a different version of that. And so I think I'm braver in that kind of outlining than I would be if I was just trying to move the prose, because it's so difficult to rearrange mid draft.
It is, and when you have the outline before you start writing,
Yeah.
there's like it's almost like a desire to stick with it, even though you
Yeah.
know you're not
Yeah.
going to. So I can see how just writing it out gives you that kind of freedom in a way
Yeah.
to do whatever.
Yeah, just follow whatever thread you want. I'm very free in a first draft. I let just like anything happen. Like if I have an idea, I put it in the book. Like if a character wants to
Yeah.
give a 15-page monologue about their past, I'm like, knock yourself out. Let's learn about you. And if I was writing to an outline, I probably wouldn't let them do that, right? I'd be like, oh, this isn't what happens in this scene. It's not the one where you suddenly reveal something that happened to you when you were 7 or something.
Yeah.
But it's fun to let it happen.
How vast are the differences between your first and final drafts then when you do the outline after the first
Yeah.
draft?
Bigger every book. So
Yeah.
like
Okay.
I think that has become like in my first novel, they were pretty close. It was just like a better version of the same book. They had one big thing that got rearranged, and then everything else was just like, a better version. The one I'm working on now, this draft is so different than the first draft that I abandoned basically everything from the first draft after the first 30 pages or so. Almost nothing is usable. It's just I usually write with them like next to each other, so I can kind of refer to it and use stuff from the first draft. I always retype it for reasons, but this time I've just like kind of abandoned the first draft. It's no longer even really useful to me, which is interesting. It's still the same story, right? But it's
Right.
just like
Right.
really different on the page, and the voice is really different, and it's kind of unfolding in a stranger, a better way, I think. But even the prose is not useful to me at this point. Like I just like the voice of the book is better than the old voice.
Are you a nostalgic person at all? Like, does that bother you that now you're just like, draft one, no, thank you.
Oh no, not in that way at least. That's
Okay.
just process. That
Okay.
feels like
Okay.
the like Hemingway iceberg theory, like you're only supposed to
Yes.
see like the 10% of the story. I think I used to think that was like this like really clever thing. You just somehow knew to only write the 10%. And I think I write 100% and then show the reader 10%, right? The other prose exists. It's there. I made it. The iceberg is real. You
Right.
just don't
Yeah.
have to encounter it, you know?
Oh, that's okay.
But yeah, I don't think of it as waste. I just think of it as process.
Okay. Awesome. Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go way back. I want to go back to when you
Yeah.
were a kid and young.
Yeah.
I'm curious, what were some of the things that you were reading or into creatively at that time?
Yeah, as a kid and a teenager, I was a big fantasy science fiction reader. Obvious things like Lord of the Rings and Narnia and lots of Dungeons and Dragons novels and things like that. Mixed in with all the stuff you read in school and random like Steinbeck novels or something. Like I remember loving Steinbeck's The Red Pony when I was like a teenager,
I don't
and
know
like
that
things
one.
like that.
Yeah.
Oh, I feel like it's like a weird like I feel like not very many people know it, and when people do, they really love it. So it's like
Okay.
one of those books.
Okay.
I don't know if it works if you don't read it for the first time when you're 13 or something, but yeah, really a lot of genre writing. By the time I was in middle school, started reading a lot of horror. Stephen King and Dean Koontz and people like that. And so I didn't really start a lot of Greek myth, a lot of fairy tales. I've always really loved that stuff. I grew up pretty religious, so a lot of kind of Catholicism, but I didn't really start reading like contemporary like literary fiction until I was probably 20. Like I think really started maybe early 20s really kind of getting into that. And I almost like I didn't know it existed. It was like a weird like I just didn't, until it'd be early college years, but I was like a serial college dropout. So I
Yeah.
started reading it really when I was dropped out of school. But yeah, in that era.
It's interesting how I kind of dropped out of school once. I
Yeah.
did go back eventually, but in between those years, I was like, I'm just going to
Yeah.
read. Don't mind me. I'll be
I
over
know,
here
right?
like consuming books. Little did I know that I could have gone to school and also read books along
It
with the
turns
stuff I
out
was learning.
they'll have you do that there too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But so that's interesting. When did you know you wanted to write? Was that early on, or did that come after you got into college a bit?
Yeah, no, probably about that same like early 20s. I wrote some when I was a teenager, but I don't think I ever thought about it as like something I would do. I think it was like a kind of like reader response. Like I was just like making like bad versions of the things I liked, right? Like here's a bad Stephen King story, here's a bad Dungeons and Dragons thing. So I think it was just like imitating things I liked as a way of like maybe having more of them, if that makes sense, right? There's only one Lord of the Rings, but you can write your own bad one.
Yeah,
And then you have two of them,
yeah.
like that kind of thing. But yeah, about that same time, kind of 20-ish, I think it was probably 20, I read like Vonnegut for the first time and Chuck Palahniuk and Colson Whitehead and Dennis Johnson, Amy Hempel, Raymond Carver, just kind of finding these people sometimes by following like interviews. I'd read interviews with people and they'd talk about writers that I'd be like, okay, I'm gonna go read that person.
Yeah.
And as soon as I started reading those people, I was like, oh, this is maybe what I want to do. Maybe I want to write some more stories. And then so when I went back to college, went back as an English major, but I'd been like a computer science major, and I was pretty committed to like I'm going to be a writer. So by 2021, I was writing quite a bit and really reading a lot of contemporary fiction at that point. I was just kind of like always reading something. Yeah.
I stumbled across this. I didn't stumble across it. There's a little free library a block or two away from me,
Yeah.
and in there, that's where I stumbled across this 1997 Best American Short Stories anthology, and I was like, I want to see who the authors are in this, and I'm like, my mind was just blown at some of these names, that back then we were like, oh, look at these short story authors, or look at these authors, and now 25, 30 years later, they're just like these I hate to say gods because I don't want to put them there, but at the same time, like these venerated beings,
Yeah.
So you're probably finding some good stuff then.
Yeah, I think so. It's funny to think about those things that were just really early career. Like I just wrote an article for Poets and Writers about something, and I've written for them a couple of times this year, and I was thinking about around that time, there's like, I don't know, 2000, reading an issue of Poets and Writers that I got at Barnes and Noble because Chuck Palahniuk was on the cover and he was like my guy.
Yeah.
And it had an interview or a profile in it about Colson Whitehead when John Henry Days came out, and it was like, he's doing the second book tour, and he had a first book that did pretty well, but like, he wasn't a household name then, like he is now. And to think like, oh, like, 25 years ago, it put me on like the trail of like a writer that I've been reading ever since, really love, but like, his like Pulitzers and stuff like that are like 20 years later, like the gap between then and now is enormous. Before he writes something like Nickel Boys,
Right, right.
or The Underground Railroad. And it's pretty, and he was great then too, but it's like amazing to see how long it can take for like, he was always, I think, a pretty famous writer, but to really hit those like things, it was the work of decades.
Do you think, oh boy, I'm going to ask this as a 50-year-old who's still trying to get that first novel out there.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you think that uh, there's a time where it's ever too late? And I don't want to use too
Yeah.
late because I know that's such a
Yeah.
pessimistic way of looking at it. But is there a point in time in a life where it's like you've really got your work cut out for you to reach that kind of level?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think well, there's two different answers here, right? One is like kind of career publishing stuff, which has its own like good luck all the time at every
And
age,
that's
And
changed
then
since
there's
then anyway, like
right,
significantly.
right.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. And then the writing part, it feels like because one of the hard parts of being a young writer is like you have no experience
that's
and you
true.
haven't read anything yet. And I mean, I can feel that even in my, I'm proud of my earlier books, but like I can feel, I just have read less or I've seen less, and there's things I don't know how to do, so I'm papering over them by doing other things, or and sometimes that turns out interesting. I think the advantage of being an older writer who's starting writing, let's say someone who starts at 60, just to make it neither of us. If you've been reading your whole life, you've got thousands and thousands of books under your belt. When you're a 20-year-old who's read 4 contemporary fiction books, is writing a short story,
Right, right.
you're writing like, yeah, you're reinventing everything and you have no sense of what is even possible or how to do things. So I think there's some real advantages to starting later in the kind of, there are some older students in my ASU classes too, but in the community stuff I teach, there's often writers who are a little later in life or mid-career or retirement or something like that. And they just bring different things to the table. They're often great workshop participants because they have more reading experience, which
Right,
tends to mean
right.
they're less like, this is the only way to do things. And I think the same thing in the writing. There tends to be a depth to it right away just because they have more life experience and more emotional experience. And I think tend to have gone through things. If you're me at 20, had my parents were alive, I hadn't had any big failures, hadn't maybe had any big successes yet. I'd a minor heartbreak or two, but like the big no kids, all this stuff, like the big experience in life are ahead of you. And at some point, you've had a lot of those experiences, and they're there to power the work. And so I think there's a depth you can sometimes, and that's not to say young people don't have depth. So you know what I mean? There's just a different
Of
thing.
course. Yeah.
So I don't know. I think that's all there. The career stuff is different. Everybody's got to find their, I mean, the age stuff is mostly about publicity, not about careers. And I
Mhm.
think that can be made to happen at any time because, I'm thinking about someone like Donald Ray Pollock. I don't know if you know his work, but his,
No.
his first book, Knock 'em Stiff, is just a great, great book. It's a short story set in a town called Knock 'em Stiff in Ohio, which is a real place where Don grew up and lived. And he worked in I think like a paper mill. And his first book came out in his 50s. He'd been reading and writing the whole time, kind of in a McCarthy, William Gay kind of way. And so his first book comes out in the mid 50s, and he goes on to write a novel that got made into a Netflix movie. He won a huge prize in France for like crime writing.
Wow.
But I don't think you get his stories if he wrote them when he's 25. But a 55-year-old guy from Knock'em Stiff, Ohio is a pretty good story, right?
I want to read
Like,
that now.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
a
That
great book.
sounds, yeah.
Yeah. So like there, I think it's really, and I don't know, the writer can only control so much of that, but like the positioning the marketplace is almost someone else's job. Like I
Yeah.
think you can't worry about it while you're writing very much anyway. It's not a reason to write or not write.
Right, right. And I noticed your list of publications each
Yeah,
year. That first 2007, 2008 was
yeah,
just
yeah,
massive. But I've noticed, and I don't know if this is a time thing or if you've switched from stories to novels, but the list each year kind of
yeah,
got a
yeah.
little shorter and shorter. What was going on with
Oh, I think it's mostly just novel writing.
novel
Yeah,
writing? Yeah,
yeah.
okay,
You're
okay.
doing if you're writing one thing for 3.5 years, you write less other
That's
stuff.
other stuff, right? Okay.
So that's really most of it. Yeah, there was a while where I was writing a lot of stories and a lot of like flash fiction stuff too. So some of those years that look like I published a lot of stuff, I did, but some of those things were 2 pages long.
Sure, sure, yeah.
Um, and what? Lately I've been writing about a short story a year, usually because someone asked me for one and I want to do it. So I've been lucky to make that happen. But yeah, I think in some ways I do a lot of my story writing inside the novels now. Like there's parts of There's, parts of every novel I've written the last couple of times that is in a different voice or in a different thing or it's coming from a different place or, you're doing these different things and they're like little set pieces almost. And I'm like, I think I just do my story writing mid novel. It just gets attached. But yeah, just not as much story writing as I used to. That's
Yeah.
all it really is.
Yeah, yeah, okay. I was as I go through as I wander my way through this
Yeah.
rocky course of getting published. I'm always curious if the publishing world changed or if what we're writing is just
Right.
different anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I think both, right?
Yeah, yeah,
It's
probably. Yeah.
interesting when someone like there's a new Sam Lipsyte story that was in the New Yorker last week that was really good. I've liked Lipsyte's work forever. I don't know if you know his stuff at all, but
Mhm.
his first book, Venus Drive, was really important to me. It's I probably read it in the early 2000s, but came out in the 90s, and he's got a certain style, and it has changed somewhat over time. But I think like a new Lipsyte story is a lot like an old Lipsyte story. But the new one had like really like contemporary like concerns in it. It was partly about like AI and writing and these different things, and I was like, oh, it's kind of interesting to see this style he's refined over 30 years, but be applied to like 2025, right?
Right.
Which of course is what it should do. You should be responsive to your time. You're not just writing the same things. But I think there's been times where, like when Sam's The Ask came out, he got like a ton of attention for that book, and I think it was a really big deal. Why that book out of the 7 or 8 he's written? But like the work's pretty consistently good. It's just like there's a moment where the culture looks at you, maybe if you get lucky. And I think, the way to take advantage of that moment is just to be doing good work the whole time and putting yourself out there. And maybe this book is your chance, and you just don't know. But if you're not writing and not finishing the books,
You'll
then it
it won't
doesn't
happen at all.
matter.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It
Yeah, yeah,
can't
yeah.
happen. Yeah.
It's such a weird fickle world.
Yeah.
But in publishing, but the only control we have is just constantly writing.
Yeah,
Just
absolutely.
keep writing,
Yeah.
and it's a the person next door to the person that rejected you could have accepted it.
Yep.
You have no
Yeah,
idea.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but just keep putting it
And
out
sometimes
there.
the same person accepts something 8 years later at a different publisher or a different thing, and they're like, "Oh, I really liked the book, but I couldn't get it past the editorial board, or I couldn't do this," or like
Yeah,
people are. I mean, I was a book editor, and you're fans of things you turn down, and you see them appear at other places, and you're like, "I'm so glad that book is working there. It just wouldn't have worked for us, maybe, or I didn't see how to make it work." And yeah, it's not just merit, right? And even what merit is a complicated sort of question, but I think I don't know. I think there's a lot of people pulling for people, even when things don't seem like they're going well. If you're putting yourself out there, like good work gets recognized, even when people can't give it a $500,000 advance or something. It doesn't mean they don't think it's good. They just can't pay $500,000 for it.
it's bad timing
Yeah.
in a way.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Just
totally.
yeah.
So, you mentioned that you're also teaching, but I'm curious. You have higher level degrees. You have masters, MFA. Do you think that's needed for a writing career? And is there a time along a writer's path when that would be more beneficial to pick up?
Yeah, I don't think it's needed. I think in an ideal world, it's a speed boost or it's a couple years of support and community. I mean, I certainly think the things I'm teaching are valuable. I'm always weirded out by creative writing professors who don't think creative writing can be taught, which feels like an odd, like deceitful way to live your life.
Right,
But,
right.
I've worked really hard at teaching, and I think students get a lot out of it. But I think you can get those in other ways. You can get them from writing groups, and get them from study on your own. I have right here by the desk like a shelf full of creative writing books, and I've learned a lot from those, right? And I learned a lot in my MFA, but over the course of my lifetime, I've learned more from reading than I have from my MFA, right? And from talking to other writers. I think community is probably the most important thing. But you can get that in lots of different ways. As far as like when to do it, I've had people do it all times of life in our program and other programs I've taught at, including people. I would say maybe the oldest person I've taught has been in their like 50s, probably. But in low res programs, I've taught people who are as I don't know, old as humans can be.
Sure.
People that
Yeah.
are coming back and they're retired or different reasons to write. Residential programs, I think, get younger students because you have to like pick up your whole life and move somewhere, and that's it tends to be harder to do
It's a
at
whole other
later
thing.
life stages.
Yeah.
But it like kind of like when to start writing. I don't think it matters that much. We tend not to take people who like have already published a couple books and are really just taking it trying to get like the teaching credential or something because they just tend to be at a different stage than the other people in workshop, and that can be challenging, right? In theory, in an MFA program, everybody's like writing their first book. The idea is like your thesis might become your first book. And so a workshop where everybody's in that state feels pretty fair. Not to be like I'm the greatest, but like 9 books in, if I went and took my own class, students would be like, "Why are you here? Why are you being mean to me when you're critiquing my books?" Right?
Right.
You're not a peer anymore. Like it's not sort of it should be a peer workshop, and it's hard to take people who are coming at that stage. And I feel bad because I get that like you might have come from a different path and you wrote a couple of books while you were working a full-time job and you decided you'd like to teach and you'd like to have that entry point, but it's hard, I think, because it just doesn't always work well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I'm 50 and applying for a master's program or
Right.
MFA program, at San Diego State, and I don't know. I feel like I don't have a lot published. I know what I need
Yeah.
to get to that point with my stories, and this would be it. I have a question about teaching, but I personally don't. I don't mind teaching. I've done it.
Yeah.
I kind of just don't want to. I want to write. I want to be a writer that teaches as opposed to a teacher that writes.
Yeah, sure.
Sort of
Yeah,
a thing.
yeah. That's the ideal for sure.
But I've noticed that a lot of writers do teach. Why do you think that is? And I'm sure they enjoy it, but I'm curious why do you think they go to teaching?
Well, there's probably two answers. One, ideally, you love teaching and you want to do it, which I think I do quite a bit, and it means a lot to me. And I put a lot of time and effort into it, and I like it a lot. It's really life giving. I like being part of the university. And one of the other things that's sort of separate from the teaching, but about being at the university is also like a really good place to think. Like you're just surrounded by interesting people. There's people to kick things around. I've learned so much just going to talks on campus and stuff. Like it's a really really good community to be in. So beyond just like the teaching, I think it's also like I would probably write different books if I wasn't, in the spaces I'm in, or I would write them differently. I think there is a financial reality, which is, the kind of career mid-list writer's career where you could write a novel and a novel every 3 years will pay your mortgage is like pretty tough.
Yeah, not anymore.
Certainly. Yeah, I mean, and I think as publishers go more and more towards kind of like the blockbuster model where we're just like we need a couple people to sell a ton of copies. There's less room in the middle. I think it's probably always been true, but I know that really worsened in like the 2008, 2009 like financial crash and just never came back. So my entire publishing career has kind of been lived inside that, post mid-list bubble thing. And so I think that's part of it. And when I was getting out of grad school in 2010, I was on the job market with a lot of people who had been kind of writers only, who then like needed teaching jobs because the money was gone. And so I think that's probably part of it. One of the things that the university job does allow, even though teaching takes time and effort, and doing committee work and all these other things, some part of my job is my writing. Like that's my research at my research university, and it is a good support. Like it does allow you to write at a certain pace, or to if I had to pay my bills with my books alone, I'd have to write a book every year that worked. It'd have to work at a certain level every year.
Yeah.
And I have friends who do that and are good at it and can be on the treadmill and like you can't ever step off and you can't ever have a book that doesn't work. And I'd write different books. I think I don't even know if I'd be good at it. Like I think the pace of like sort of knowing that I'm more or less taken care of, and the writing, certainly does have a financial impact in my life, but is not like if I try something really ambitious and it fails, it's okay. Like, it's not like I have to sell my house or something. So there's probably some of that. But that actually becomes artistic security for me, if that makes sense. It allows me to take big swings. It allows me to work at a pace that's healthy. And I'm a pretty like, I'm on it. I'm writing most days, but like it does do that. So I think that's part of it. And there was just an explosion of MFA programs and undergrad creative writing in the last 50 years that also just made a lot more jobs available. I think creative writing wasn't really in academia that much 35 years ago, and certainly not 50. You could go to Iowa or nowhere, right? So like, it's now there's a lot of options. And so that's part of it. There's just more opportunities to teach.
I appreciate it. I like that it's there, because I think if you write, you probably have a good sense of what you're doing. So they're the people you would want to take the class
Sure hope so.
from. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
And
Good
I,
writers don't always make good teachers and vice versa, right? They are different
that's
skills. Like
true.
it's okay that they're different skills.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I do like that the grad school programs, the MFAs, they're including that teaching degree as well.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, and I
Yeah.
think that's smart. I think it's just a good way of doing it.
Presumably makes you good at other things too, right? Like learning to teach also makes you a better public speaker. Producing lesson plans and managing students makes you a better, you could run a business. There's lots of things you can do with those degrees, and I think it's good training for lots of things.
Yeah, I was raised by a baby boomer mother,
Yeah, yeah.
who was like, work, save up money, retire. It's the best way to go, And
Yeah,
I
yeah,
just
yeah.
I
You can write your
struggled.
books when you're 67,
Exactly,
Yeah.
right. And I've struggled. I worked. I did my thing, but I've just been
Yeah.
struggling the entire time until the last 10 or so years. And now I'm just like, all right, that's not working for me.
Right.
I got to do this, and it might be harder. I realize now that she was just trying to kind of protect me from
Absolutely.
the hard parts of life, and I appreciate it. It just didn't work.
My parents too, same thing, right? Like they would be much happy. Well, they're happy now because it all worked out.
It all
But there
worked
was a
out. Yeah,
time
yeah,
when
yeah.
they were like, "What are you doing?" Right?
Yeah.
They were very proud of me, but it took it working for that to be the case in some ways.
Yeah. And working is a great motivator to write, if I'm being honest
Yeah,
with you. It
That
helps
was
me.
all those early stories I wrote. I think I published my first story maybe in 2004. I went to grad school in 2008. I didn't finish undergrad. I finished undergrad at 26 in 2006. And I was just bartending and managing restaurants the whole time, And then I went to grad school and it was like a playground. I was like, I wasn't talking about how to sell Mongolian barbecue anymore. I was, I've always appreciated the professional life I have as a writer, in part because I had the professional life as a bartender, restaurant manager. Nothing wrong with those jobs. I like doing that too. I'm glad I'm not doing it at 44 for me,
Right, for me, yeah, for us, yeah.
Yep.
I've worked many corporate jobs, and right now I have a part-time job that is a part-time job, but most of my income comes from podcast production, being a
so
podcast
great.
producer.
Yeah.
So I've at least been able to stay in the arts somehow, while I keep working on my writing. But I knew I had to do that. I couldn't stay in an office job while I was doing my writing. It wasn't working. But
as soon as you use the part of you that writes while you're at work, and that's hard, right? It's hard to come home. I feel like if you're writing ad copy all day or something, like you're using your creativity at work, and it's hard to use it at home. Even teaching, I write in the mornings before I go to campus because otherwise I can revise after. I can't draft. That part of my brain doesn't work after I've been in the world and I've taught and used that kind of energy. It's just not there in the evenings.
You are not the only teacher I've talked to who has said the same thing. They're like, I write before I teach. I don't I don't try to write after because I won't have the brain capacity to do it.
Yeah.
So I can appreciate that. I got in a conversation this morning with some friends about character names, and in some of your stories, names aren't revealed.
Yeah.
And I really like that. Is this a conscious decision, and what's your reasoning for it?
Yeah, it was then. I think I don't do it that much anymore, I don't think. But some of it said names are hard, right?
Yeah,
So
sure.
I sort of do that. I think at the time, correct me if I'm wrong, Adam, but I think the book of mine you read was A Tree or a Person or a Wall, right?
That's
the story
the one.
collection.
Yeah.
And so I would say about 90% of those stories were written in or around my MFA, so written about 15 years ago, or in the couple years after school. And I think at the time I was thinking a lot about characters as archetypes, and I think a lot about roles. There's a lot of stories in that book where a character becomes like a person who shouldn't be, becomes like a detective for a while and tries to solve like Dredge tries to solve like what happened to the girl and stuff,
Right, yeah.
And that guy has a name, but you know what I mean, and in some ways like the role of like husband or son or detective is actually maybe more illustrative in certain ways than a name is. Would it be better if the detective's name was Kevin instead of just the detective? I don't know. What is the name communicating? But I was really on that at the time. I really felt like I was distilling characters. I wasn't giving you that access to them. And sometimes that goes along with, I think I was trying to work with kind of limited interiority. And there were just these ways that I was maybe, I don't know, for better or worse, not always allowing the reader close to the character. I was, there's a little distance sometimes.
A little bit of an arm distance, but waving them in.
Yeah,
kind of thing.
yeah. It's like I'm playing a little hard to get, which I don't know is that good of a tactic, but because there's a lot of books in the world, and the one that plays hard to get might not be great. But I was thinking about that a lot. That it was sort of like like husband and wife is a relationship that's sort of clear on the surface, or husband or father and son or something. And it's that relationship that's interesting to me, and it doesn't really matter what those people are named, and I think that was sort of what I was thinking about. I'm not saying I'll never do that again, but there's less of that in my work now. I think characters tend to have names, and it certainly makes it easier to write about. My first novel, the characters are it's first person, so it's a husband, but the wife's name is never revealed. He never says his name. And there are two children, but they're either not named or their names don't come up, and they're weird kids. One is a ghost child that lives inside the guy called the Fingerling, and the other one is this child that the wife brings home from the woods that he calls the Foundling. So if it has a name, he doesn't use it.
Yeah.
And that estrangement is part of the book. But I also remember like when it was getting like reviews and stuff, like it's really awkward to write about a book where the characters don't have names. It's like irritating
How do you write that?
to review.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I feel it sometimes when I'm writing reviews and people have done that. I'm like, this is really hard to write about. And I remember like, I don't think this is why I changed, but just reviewers were like, we're irritable about it.
We want a name. Give us a name.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah. But partly it's just, yeah, it's hard for them.
Yeah. Madeline Fitch. She.
Well, it's work I love. Yeah.
She does something similar as well. And I appreciate it. There's a bit of a it makes the character a little more universal, I think. I'm not to put myself in any of those categories, but I'm.
No, we're all writing. We're all writers.
Yeah.
We're all equal on the page. Yeah.
Right. Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm cleaning up a story now. Editing a story where there's 5 total characters. And it's 4 of them is man, woman, father, mother, and they're capitalized. So then I when I thought of doing that, I was like, well, that makes it applicable to everyone who could be
right.
That
they become
character.
kind of mythic, mythopoetic, right? They're sort of
yeah. So I appreciate when authors do that. It expands the not only the character but the writing style. You don't see a lot of that. I don't think.
Yeah, I will say when you're putting together a collection that has as many stories as the Trio Person Wall does, and you've done it a lot, it's like its own problem, right? It's like there's like which story is the one about the boy? Oh, these 8,
Yeah,
and they're like it's like hard to order them and hard to it is a limiting factor, but maybe better in a novel than in a book of stories. Yeah,
it could be. It depends on the layout of the stories though, because I
of
noticed
course.
in this one, like the first few, they didn't really have names, and I'm like, oh, this is fun. And then they started getting names. I'm like, oh, okay, now I guess we're getting names. So I was like, all right, cool. But so I think if you have them in the right order, it works.
I think that's right. Yeah. You can get away with anything, right? Like the rule is always like make it interesting and make it work. Like you can do anything you want.
Yeah. Let's since we've been talking about publication and publishing, I want to talk a little bit about rejection. I some friends of mine and I have taken to blacking out our rejection letters to make them like sound mean,
oh yeah, nice. I love that.
It's fun. It lessens that sting a little bit, So I'm kind of curious, how do you personally cope with publication rejection? And on the flip side, actually, how do you celebrate the wins that probably are pretty infrequent in this publication world right now?
I do think I have a pretty tough skin about rejection at this point. It doesn't mean it's not a bummer, but like I don't view I'm 20 years into publishing, like you've been rejected a lot there, and even when things are going really well, the bar just moves. There's just like another thing you want, like you publish you're like, I just want to publish a story, and then you publish a story and you're like, I want to publish a story in like a really big magazine. You publish a story in a big magazine, like I want to publish a book. You publish a book, you're like, I want to publish a big five book. You publish a big 5 book, you're like, I want to win the Nobel Prize. You just keep moving it. And so and there's just so many rejections at every layer then, so you're just always doing that. I'll tell a rejection story. It starts off, it'll sound braggy, but it ends in failure. So I think it'll be okay.
That's a good balance, right?
Yeah. My first novel was a finalist for the Young Lions Fiction Prize, which is, given by the Young Lions, the New York Public Library, and, started by Ethan Hawke. And it's very fancy. It's maybe the only award thing I've been to where I had to wear like a black tie kind of thing. And there, they always have, because Ethan Hawke started it, they always have like actors give like readings from the work that are finalists. So, I got to see like a famous actor read my book, and Michael K. Williams read from the book. I mean, it was really cool,
Yeah.
And I was the last one of the excerpt. So he read from my book, and then they got up and read, and it was so great. And they got up and read the winner, and it wasn't me. And my wife had been videotaping it just in case it was me, and then handed me my phone. And at the exact moment on the phone, I got a rejection on a poem from a literary magazine.
Uh, yeah.
And I was just like, you're so close to the moment of like your greatest triumph, perhaps. And then it's like, what if you just lost a couple of times, one in a big way, one in a small way, one in a, and it was like, and it's fine. That's just part of those things that happens. And I was like, let's go to the bar,
Right. Yeah.
and it was totally all right. And that stuff happens all the time. You're, uh, actually for that same book, I had a time where my, marketing director at the time misread an email and told me I had won a
Oh
prize.
no.
And he's like, don't say anything. It's not going to be announced till tomorrow. And then it was announced tomorrow. I had not won. And he's like, I misunderstood. I had not told a soul. I hadn't even told my wife at the time. I had actually like kept it in, and I was so glad. But I was crushed, right?
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
like, and that stuff happens, and it's okay. And then of course, there's the millions of lit mag rejections, and even when you sell a book, like Appleseed sold at auction, we had number of presses that were interested in it, but I think there were still 20 people who didn't want it
Didn't
but have
want it.
seen
Yeah.
it, right? You know
Yeah.
what I mean? It's like, so the more people rejected it than took it. Like, it's okay, but you only need one person to take it. I'll just say this: I've been talking too long, but there's a Jane Smiley quote I really love, where Smiley said, "You can either love the work or you can love the rewards. Life is a lot easier if you love the work." And that is like
Ooh.
really, really my focus. Like, the writing is mine. That's the part I control. That's the part I do, as you said earlier. And the thing I get out of writing the books is really meaningful to me and really important. And the publishing is important too, and I'm really grateful for it. But it's not the thing that gives the writing its value to me, except in the ways that it has allowed me to have the life I have. But like, it's really, really the writing, and that's the bulwark against rejection for sure.
Right. Right. And as you said, it only just takes one to balance
Yeah.
so many rejections out.
And that's really also how it actually works, right?
Yeah.
Like, like most people have the one agent who wanted to work with them. They have the one editor who the agent could get to take the book, it's usually, and then sometimes those books blow up and people will be like, this book was rejected 60 times. Look how good it did. I'm like, but that's every book. You know
Yeah,
what I mean?
yeah.
Like, it's like every book was rejected 60 times. Not every, but and I think it's just part of the process. And literature is built out of like a small chain of people loving one book and then putting it out in the world and seeing what happens. And it's tenuous and lucky, and I have a lot of gratitude for it. But so I don't take it that, I don't know. My work isn't for everybody. It's okay if people don't like it. It's okay if people don't want to publish it. Yeah.
But it's still okay to feel lucky that we get to
Yeah,
do all
absolutely.
this
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah, yeah.
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 If you equate it to, let's say, baseball, like you get
Yeah.
400 at bats. A
Right.
good hitter hits one out of every four.
Yeah, yeah,
That's
yeah.
the major league average. It's 250. So if you're
Yeah.
getting 75% rejections and 25% acceptances, you're doing pretty great.
Yeah,
You
and
know?
I think that's exactly right. There was just a quote I saw yesterday from a baseball article in the Irish Examiner that was talking about like the reason baseball's so great is exactly that. It's like it's the thrill of failure. The only place you can only succeed a third of the time and everyone claps for you, right?
Right.
Like it's
Yeah.
like and all those things. I think I don't know. I feel like that's true of our thing too. It's like it's very hard, and you spend a lot of time alone, and the rewards are mixed at best, and yet it's like I wouldn't rather do anything else with my mornings. Like this is what I want to be doing with my life, and I'm lucky to get to do it. Yeah.
It's one of the things that I'm happiest about when I get to do it.
Yeah.
Like I don't.
Yeah.
There's a few things I get a lot of joy out of in life, and writing is one of them.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
It doesn't matter if as you were saying, it doesn't matter if it gets published or whatever. Like
Yeah.
I got to sit down and tell a story today.
Yeah. And that's part of that answer to your question earlier about like the stuff I throw away or the stuff I don't use or any of that. I had fun writing that stuff. It doesn't need to be in the book, but it doesn't mean I like usually it was a pretty good time making that first draft that I don't end up using much of,
Yeah.
So who cares? Like it was enjoyable when I did it. Like it was a good way to pass my days,
It was fun while it lasted.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So we talked a little earlier about the outdoors and hiking and getting outside, and there are studies showing how beneficial nature can be to not just just our brains in general. If we were to narrow that down to writing, how much importance do you place on the not writing part of writing? And because we're urged to write every single day, but sometimes it's probably best to step away from that, I would think.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
I do write most days, at least a little bit, but that's partly because the day I write, I feel more like myself than maybe a day I don't. I think it's partly just self reification or something. But yeah, the other stuff is great. I mean, writing is weird because you go away from life in order to try to say something true about life,
Mm,
right? Like
that's
that's like
true. Yeah.
an odd way of doing it. And all the arts are really like that. You go by yourself to make a painting of a sunset, instead of looking at the sunset. But yeah, I think your experience is really important. I certainly think the other art that comes in, I can feel myself at the end of a book sometimes. Like I've wore out the art base of what got me to that book, right? Like
Hmm.
I'm out of images, there's no ideas left. I like need new experiences. And I always really feel that in between books where like I try to write and like maybe there's just like what's there is not rebuilt yet. I do think like for me, like that we're talking about outdoors, I get a lot out of my body and motion in the world. I get a lot out of being the stuff you see, the stuff you think about, the time you have, being in nature. This summer for a book I'm working on, it's about this, but I'm writing a book partly about medieval pilgrimage. And I went to Spain and hiked one for, a couple weeks.
Oh, fun.
And I didn't write while I was hiking it. I did make notes like on my phone and stuff, but I didn't listen to anything. I walked by myself, and so no podcast, no podcast, no
No, no
radio,
offense
no
taken. Yeah.
I know, no music, no, I didn't watch any TV. I didn't, I read at night, but otherwise I just, no audiobooks. And I got so much out of just like thinking and walking for like 8 or 10 hours a day, right? Like sometimes about the book, but often just like really thinking. And I just could feel my brain like kind of opening back up in a way that I'm really trying to sort of preserve in my life now. Even in odd ways. Like I think I just found new kinds of thinking, like just briefly, like you get like a part of a song stuck in your head,
Yep. Yeah.
like a line, and it's just going over and over again. But then I would like over the course of the day, like rebuild the whole song. Like I would like be able to like remember the whole thing
The
if I
rest of
just
it.
kept
Yeah.
walking and talking and
Yeah.
to myself. And I was like, oh, it's amazing that's in there. And same with like some poems that I really love. I was thinking about, and I was able to like build the whole poem again. And I'm like, I didn't even know I'd memorized that. And having that space to let my brain just work in a way that wasn't like produce was, I think, super useful, and it has paid off for coming back, right? Like
Yeah.
I came back in a different mindset that's really been useful to me. Yeah.
Are there times? So it sounds like you're always thinking about the writing, even when you're not writing. You're
Yeah,
thinking about it. Yeah.
maybe.
Yeah. Maybe. Okay. All right.
I do a lot of stuff that's not that too, but yeah, yeah,
Okay. All right.
yeah.
I've had some people say, even if you sit down at a blank document with a blinking cursor for an hour and you don't write anything, you're just trying to get something out. That's still
Yeah.
the writing process.
I
So
think so too. Yeah. As soon as you have to fail into your writing, right?
right.
Like, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, okay. So let's go ahead and wrap up. This is a question I ask everybody, so I'm kind of
Sure.
curious what your answer is. If there was one book or movie or song or anything creative you wish you wrote, what would it be?
Oh, yeah. I wish I had those like Bible royalties. That would have been a good one
That
to
would have been
write,
nice. Yeah.
but yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it would have been good. But that was kind of a team effort anyway.
I did have somebody say that they wish they wrote the Bible because then everybody would have a voice. So I thought that was an interesting
Oh yeah,
answer.
that's pretty
Yeah,
good. I like
yeah,
that too. I immediately think of like favorite books of mine, like Jesus' Son by Dennis Johnson or Le Guin's Left Hand of Darkness or things like that. I remember, you were talking about House of Leaves earlier. I remember reading that for the first time, being like, oh, I just want to make one of these.
yes, yeah,
And maybe what I'll say about it is like I really love influence. I think some writers are like fleeing from influence or want to pretend to be uninfluenced. I don't think anyone is uninfluenced, but I'm really crave it, and I feel like the writers I know who are the most unique on the page have the like widest influence base. They're influenced by the most people. That's why you can't figure out what they're doing. You can't see all the influences, and so. Is there really a book I wish I wrote? I don't know, but I do know when I'm writing, I'm like, oh, I'm thinking about how Le Guin would do this, or I'm thinking how Don DeLillo would do this, and how Toni Morrison would do this. And maybe I'm trying in my little piece of that novel to like, let's do a little Toni Morrison here. Let's do a little Dennis Johnson here. Let's do a little Ian Banks here. And I don't really want that to go away. I feel like that's a way of like playing with my heroes. It's nice.
yeah, yeah.
One of the things I love about trail running is that when you run like I've ran some of like the big races in the US, but obviously not a person who's going to win it, but like you're on the same course with the guy who's like the best person in the country, right? And you're way behind him, but you're there.
You're on it.
And
Yeah,
right. And writing's the same way, right? The blank page, everybody's got the same blank page. And I like that I'm doing my task with the same tools like my heroes did theirs with, you know, and that seems pretty cool. And what a lucky thing. Like they got their book by sitting down in front of the blank page, and so am I. Who's to say I can't write one like it, you know?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point. We all kind of start at a same spot in a way,
Yeah.
with that
Yeah.
blank page, and
Every
that's it.
time
Just,
too,
just an
right? It
idea.
doesn't-
Yeah, every time. Doesn't
Every
matter
time.
who we are, where we've been. We
Yeah.
all start with nothing,
Yeah.
and we create our thing. So that's a really good point. I've looked at some of my authors, the authors that I am influenced by, and I have attempted in my way of honoring them with how I write. Like
Yeah.
Raymond Carver and Murakami are two of my favorites.
Yeah.
But I've started to really branch out into these other writers that it's a different style of writing. And even with my poetry, it's the same way. Like I'm always looking at it and be like, well, let me play with that. And I remember in a class years ago, we were tasked with writing a poem mimicking the style of another poet that we liked. And I loved that exercise. It taught me so much about my own voice. So I can appreciate still trying that no matter where you are on your
Yeah.
path. Yeah, it's important.
Yeah, I think imitation is one of the great ways to learn. That's how we learn everything, right? I have a nephew who's 9, who's great at sports and he's super coordinated. But pulls up YouTube, watches a guy do a golf swing for a while, and he goes out and he does it, right?
Yeah.
And it's like he didn't invent the golf swing, like he learned it somewhere. It's great. It's okay to learn from people. I feel like writers get so obsessed with like I have to be this totally unique person that isn't like anybody else, which is a good way to write books no one's going to want to read either, you know? Like it's not useful or helpful to some extent to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's okay to have your voice, but at the same time, I think it's rare to be so unique that nobody can match you with anybody that's similar.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like that's why we have
absolutely.
bookstores they're all grouped in certain genres, I guess,
And you go see some like an outsider art museum where people don't have any formal training and have made things, and it's always super interesting. Some of it's really great, but like I think that's a tough, lonely road too. Like I like that the work is in conversation with other people. I don't mind that someone who like loves Brian Evans's work will find something to like in mine because I love Brian Evans's work. I think that's a lovely thing. It's like it's a the long game of telephone we're all playing with each other is really like kind of a delight. Yeah.
I was worried that you'd heard too much when that your story was kind of close to Cloud Atlas. Like I wonder.
Oh no,
like,
not
does that
at
sort of
all. No,
thing
yeah.
bother?
Again, like it's like, oh, your book kind of reminded me of this great book that this other guy wrote. It's like, good. I'm glad to be in conversation with David Mitchell. That seems fine.
Nothing wrong with that.
There's a kind of, we talked about like what success or rejection looks like, but I think a thing that I feel really grateful for is that that I have in some ways gotten to be like at the table with some of the people I love, if that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
And there's writers I really love that you get sometimes spoken about in conversation with, or you've got to like literally become friends with or something, or colleagues. And I think, if someone had asked me at the beginning of my career if I thought that would be possible, I don't know that I would have. It's like those people, because like we said, they're not gods, but they're kind of gods, and like it's nice to get to visit once in a while with the gods, and I think it's lucky to be, not again saying that I'm at the same level as these people I admire, but like it's nice to be part of the shared craft and the shared effort and the shared literature that we are all part of, even before you're publishing, just by writing you're part of it. And I think that's really inspiring and beautiful.
And I think nowadays the ability for you and I to have this conversation, like because I took that class and then I read your book while at the dentist office, and I was just like, I forgot I was at the dentist because I was like so enamored with what I was reading, and it's like it. And I think I mentioned this to you in a message. Whenever I read authors that I kind of latch on to with how much I like it, it influences me and motivates me and inspires me to just be a better writer. So So I echo what you're saying. I appreciate it. So.
Well, I'll say, Adam, I have a lot of dental anxiety, and if my book made you forget you're at the dentist, that feels like it was worth writing the thing for. If I could make one person less afraid at the dentist, I've done my work.
You did a great job with it. She was scraping away, and I just wanted to finish reading the story. I got interrupted, so I really appreciate it. But well, Matt, this was episode 100 of this series, and I'm glad we got to do it. I think this was a fun talk, so I appreciate you again making the time for this.
Well, thanks so much, and congratulations on your 100th. I really appreciated talking to you. It was a great conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Now let's go listen to Murder by Death for the rest of the afternoon.
Yeah, let's
right?
do it.
All right.